Hi everyone, this is Kelly from The Truth in Story, and I am here to do, I should put these on, but I'll wait, I see they're getting steamed up because my hair is wet. Anyways, I am here because I watched a great video from Katey Flowers this morning, and I will put a link to it in the description box below. Please take time to go and watch that because I'm responding to Katey Flowers' video. Katey Flowers was responding to I believe, maybe a Facebook thread or something in a group. I have not seen that. I've not read any of it. So I'm not responding to that because I haven't seen it. I'm responding to her video. So if you want to see her video, please click the link below so you can watch hers because it was fascinating and I thought really well put together. And it's definitely a topic that has come up over and over again. I certainly get asked this question a lot. And so I thought I would continue the conversation with Katey because I was like, yes, the whole time. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. Now, as you can tell from the title, she read a new word, and she didn't come up with it. She read this I think, in this particular thread, where instead of calling a deck fluffy or affirmative, it was called nice washing. And nice washing, like you're putting instead of whitewashing, where you would put a layer of white over something, you are nice washing and putting a layer of nice over tarot. And so apparently in the original thread, that was the topic, that it was, there were several issues that people had with that, which I'm going to address in a second. But I think that before I go into some of the things that I wanted to address, because I thought, again, great video, Katey, I wanted to sort of lay some groundwork because I often feel like conversations can go awry or askew when people think they're talking about the same thing or think that they're on the same conversational playing field, and very often they're not. Somebody's talking about one thing over here, another person's talking about something that's a little bit different, and they're actually not having the same conversation, or they're not viewing the words the language being used is being seen very differently. And I think that very often complicates conversations and dialogue when that happens. So number one, I want to be very clear about how I see tarot. And again, you may or may not agree with this, and that's certainly your prerogative, but I very firmly believe that tarot is a tool. I don't believe that there is anything inherently magical in a specific deck of cards. So this is not a tarot deck, so we'll just grab this one. I have some decks here, but they're not opened up yet. So this is a deck of cards, and I don't personally believe that there is any inherent magic in these particular pieces of paper, right? I do think there is a beauty and a symmetry and a magic sort of infused in the system of tarot over so many generations of being used. And so the system is something that I do consider to be quite a beautiful, powerful system. But in these particular cards, or any particular deck of cards that I might pick up in the pieces of paper here, I don't view there as being any magic, any energy other than what I put into it. I don't, this is a tool for me to use. And I think this is a really important distinction, right? Because I believe, one of the things I thought was interesting when I was chewing on this while I was getting ready was that, like all good tools, right? This tool actually came with an instruction manual. And this is what I think is awesome. This just got me so excited this morning when I was taking a shower, literally. The very first card, this fool, is number 0. So number 1, instruction number 1 from the tarot deck, right? And I'm using the borderless Rider-Waite-Smith here, which is a gorgeous deck, can I say? But number 1, so rule 1 of using the tarot, it's in you. Right? Everything that you need is at your disposal for you to manifest into the physical world. Instruction number 1, everything you need is within yourself to manifest into the physical world. And rule number 2, right? Same thing. All of the intuition, all of the magic, all of the wonderful things is sitting in your lap. Your feet are on, your feet are connected to it. You are physically tapping into any intuitiveness that you need, right? Now, of course, you could say, I guess, that the book in her lap could represent a physical object, and these things could, but the very key of these, for me, the very key message here is an instruction book to you that says it's in you, that you have the access to the intuitiveness, any magic that might be there, any wonder, and any messages that come are coming from you. So we have the deck of tarot cards weighing in on this topic from my perspective, right? It's in you to manifest into the physical world. So that being the case, and I personally do believe that. I believe that when I'm doing a reading that I could literally, I wish I had some candy here, but I could literally pull up some candy and I could give you a message. I could come up with something. I can pick up a set of dice. I can pick up a set of geomancy sticks. I can pick up all different kinds of tools, right? And still be able and come up with a message because the message isn't in the cards inherently. It's in myself, and where I tap into for me personally, drop down, tap into the collective unconsciousness, tap into the web that connects all of us across space and time, and that's what allows me to get a message, not these pieces of paper. So I think that's an important distinction to make, right? Because I think that I think some of why people will get up in arms and protective over tarot decks and whether something is being ruined or any of that type of thing comes from perhaps putting too much power into the paper and not enough power, or into the tool, and not enough power into your own self, into where the messages might be coming from. Of course, people do use tarot to tap into spirit guides, to tap into many different other ways, right? But it's still something that you're tapping into. It's not the cards itself. And again, I adore that the tarot deck gave you rule 1 and rule 2 on this particular subject. So I wanted to make sure that I do actually have some notes here because the other important thing that I wanted to level the playing field, or not level the play, make sure that we're on the same topic, is I thought Katey did a really good job of saying exactly what, whenever you listen to somebody and they're saying something and you're nodding, you're saying, yes, 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 I could have said that exactly same thing. That's not saying that, oh, I could have done it better. It's saying that they're tapping into, right, the way that you see something and you're just like, oh, yeah, 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 yeah. You're like on the same wavelength. And I loved what she talked about the fact, and I didn't type exactly what she said, but she talked about the fact, and she goes into some personal information about her own path, which obviously I'm not going to touch into, but she made note several times that in terms of shadow work and in terms of doing healing work, she doesn't need a dark deck or what people might think of as a heavy hitting deck to tap into her shadow, to tap into her difficult space. What she most often needs in those is something to support her or be a light for her. And that was to me like a high, I was like, yes, yes, this is what I'm saying here. So I generally use, if I'm going to do shadow work, and I've done a video on shadow work, and I feel like we're always processing shadow work on an ongoing basis. For me personally, if I'm doing concentrated shadow work, it's generally around grief. So if you've watched the channel, that my 23-year-old son died 4 years ago this past December. And so much of where I might take a deck and work specifically with a deck for shadowy types of difficult, painful things, is surrounding grief. I do not need a deck of cards or a tool to dig my way into the caverns of pain or loss or grief. The problem is that that's where I would be at in that moment, or that's where I'm going to, or I know that that's coming up. And so I need a deck that's going to help me to work through that. Sometimes that is in comfort and support and shining that light. Sometimes that is for other particular reasons. But I don't need a particular deck to be dark or to be hard hitting or heavy hitting or anything of that nature to get me there. I'm there. So I think that that's also important, because you often see along the terms of shadow work that you need, what is it? What's kind of dark? So what's a deck that you might use for shadow work? And trust me, sometimes that is, again, I think sometimes it is there. So for example, I have spent a month with the Marielle Tarot. Now, I don't consider the Marielle Tarot to be a dark deck, but it's definitely what some people might seem to say as very hard, deep hitting. It's very, you really have to sink into the cards. You really need to can go really meaty with it. I'm trying to think of words people might use, but that sort of, it's deep. It can be difficult. It can be confrontational in some ways. Of course, I also think it can be extremely supportive and is absolutely stunning. So I have spent an entire month doing grief work with the Marielle. Fantastic. It served the purpose that I needed it to serve. The tool did what I needed it to do. But what I have most often found, and this is what Katie Flowers talked about, is that if I know that I'm going into a period of heavy grief, right? So December is very hard for me. It's the month that he died. March is very hard for me. It's actually, I think, more hard for me perhaps than his death date is his birth date. There's so many intense memories that are 23 years worth of life memories that just get coalesced in a birthday and the birth of your firstborn child. And so March is extremely difficult for me. It's one of those months that I now know, 4 years in to the grieving process, I know that I need support in March, right? Mother's Day can be a hard day for me. Even my birthday sometimes can be a hard day, because he did lots of cute, quirky things on my birthday, and that kind of nostalgia things come up. So there's times in which I know that I am rolling into what's going to be a difficult time for me. And I have started to do sort of a little ritual where I will either generally purchase as a start going into it. No, okay, March is coming up. I can start to feel that I'm going to start to do some work, and it's going to be difficult. And I tend to find that I lean towards needing what I call hug decks. Now, I have definitely been guilty in the past of saying, no, affirmation decks, no, hug decks, fluffy decks, no. I have definitely been guilty of that in the past, because I am a person who loves balanced decks. And this is another topic, so I'm not going to go far into that today, because this is a very specific talk about nice washing type fluffy decks, affirmation decks, hug decks, affirmative decks. I already said that. But I do really prefer, on an everyday basis and on a general rule, I prefer decks to be very balanced. Balanced masculine and feminine. I don't like decks that have all women in it. I don't like decks that have all men in it. I like decks that are masculine, feminine balanced, light and shadow balanced. One of the beauties of the tarot system is that I do think it is a beautifully balanced system. And so I prefer to have that as a general rule. And so I am definitely guilty in the past of saying no to hug decks, and certainly my ratio to what I would consider just normally balanced decks to a more nice washed decks is very skewed to a balanced deck, because I do think that's very important to me personally. However, I have found, again, going back, that again, those moments in which I know I'm rolling into some dark work, some heavy grief work, some painful situation, I personally don't need a deck to take me there. I don't. If that's the problem, I'm going to be there. I'm there no matter what. And I have found decks, like just as I spent a whole March once with the Marielle, I spent a whole December, it was a difficult December. I'd had, maybe it was like, I think it was last December, not this December, but the last December. Somebody had sent this to me just right at that time when I was going into December. And this deck, I read with this deck almost every day of that month of December. And I mean, there's bones in this, but you know, I don't know. I find this to be a sweet. I don't know. Again, Katey also talked about like what is as a nice wash deck. There is such a spectrum of what she kind of gave some examples of what people were calling nice wash decks, and so there was a huge spectrum. A couple people, she said, even said that the Wild Unknown with the 10 spears driven into the body of a bull and the 10 of swords was a nice washed deck. No, I certainly don't have that experience. But my point being, and her point being, everybody's idea of what a nice washed or an affirmative or supportive deck or a fluffy deck, as some people call it, which has of course become quite derogatory towards, although I don't usually use fluffy. I usually use hug deck. For me, it's a hug deck. It's a support deck. So I would consider this to be sweet, clean, simple. Certainly not up until when I was sent this deck. It wasn't a deck that I would have purchased myself. It's sweet and it's cute. I had amazing support and messages from this particular deck all through the month of December, focused on my deepest shadow, which is pain and loss surrounding grief. And it worked beautifully. It was just what I needed. I have never much used it since, but in that month, it is exactly what I needed. The first, I think, hug deck that I purchased that started to change my mind, right, was when my grandmother was passing away. Now, she was over 100 years old. We obviously all in the family, you know, wished her well to move on. It was her time to move on, and we wanted that for her. She lived a long, full life of love and difficulty and everything that we all have, and it was time for her to move on, but it was still painful. She was the thread, and still is the thread that bound a huge family. She had many, many children. They had many, many children. They had many, many. We have a lot of people in our family, and she was the thread. She was the key. She was there. She what started it all with my grandfather, who passed a long time ago. And so even though we really wanted for her to have that easing into the next realm, it was very difficult for me. She's always been there my entire life, right? You know, your parents, your grandparents. I had a close relationship with my grandmother. She was always there. That was just, it was a given, right? And that given was being removed. And I stumbled on the Namaste deck, which is not a tarot deck, so I know I'm going off topic, but that's okay. This is by Tony Carmine Salerno, and I just picked it up on a whim. This was everything at the time that I would have said I don't like about a deck, right? It is an affirmation style deck. It is has the words written on the cards, and just, you know, it just was everything that I said. This just doesn't work for me. It's great for you, but it doesn't work for me. And I absolutely love this deck. It is, to me, a hug deck. It is a supportive deck, and it's an upside down deck. It has angels in it, which is not something that I typically work with. It's just very supportive, and it gives you a blessing. It gives you, like, so example here, a blessed gift, which is beautiful. Something beautiful soon manifests. Trust that all is unfolding in the most perfect way for you and all concerned. Have faith and continue to hold positive and loving thoughts. A blessed gift is on the way. Support. It is like almost like a greeting card, sweetness to the messages. Although, again, I have found these to be every time, well, in that moment. So I purchased this in the time period that my grandmother was passing away, and I pulled one of these for myself whenever I needed a hug or I needed that kind of support, and every time it was exactly what I needed to hear, and it definitely, you know, got me through what I needed at that moment. Again, I know it's not tarot, but I wanted to mention this one because it was the first one that started to make me realize there is a time and a place for, I'm not going to start singing, but I feel like singing A Place for Us from the West Side Story. Um, there's a place for singing too, right? There's a place for deep conversation, and there is a place for singing. There's always a place for musical singing. Anyways, I wanted to bring this up because this was the first deck that made me start to realize, to maybe rethink my position on, balanced decks versus affirmative or hug style decks. So, but going back to tarot, there were a couple things that she brought up, I think, that were some of the arguments that people used towards why you should not white. And I'll use a better example. And of course, I'm sure, again, I did not read the initial thread, but given what Katey said, Doreen Virtue style angel deck certainly came up in the idea of nice washing, whitewashing, fluffy decks that should not exist upon the earth kind of thing, right? This was another deck going along with this one that I purchased when my grandmother was passing. I can't remember if it was while she was still alive or if it was after she passed, but it was right in that time period in which my grandmother was passing and or had died. I'm not sure, to be quite fair. This is a deck that I never, would have purchased. Because now, in all fairness, for a couple of reasons, I don't really work with angel decks or angel energy. That's just simply not something that I work with. And again, I do like really balanced decks and, all of the reasons that I had. But Katey Flowers, I believe, did a video on the Guardian Angel Tarot, and I was shocked to see it come on because I think, we kind of had the same feeling about that. There's a place for them, but you can go a little bit too far. I felt like we kind of were the same. We both like really balanced decks. And so I was really surprised when I saw the Guardian Angel Tarot by Doreen Virtue on her channel and her walkthrough, and the experience that I was having with my grandmother pass away made me purchase this deck because it feels like the prayer. My grandma was a sweet, wonderful, intensely, beautifully Catholic woman. She went to Mass every day in her older years. She took communion to the nursing home and gave communion to the people that were shut-ins. She was always had her rosary. She had a Rolodex file of people that she prayed for that was a mile long, and she prayed for them every single day. She was not one of these people who were just talking. She walked a beautiful Christian Catholic example. And if all Christians and Catholics were more like my grandmother, the world would be an amazing place, right? And so this is, and there's little prayer cards and things that she had. And this just reminds me of that energy. It is sweet. It is nostalgic. It is in a way kitschy, but kitschy in the best kind of way. There are fat cherubs in it and Santa Claus-esque type of people under spiritual teacher. I mean, how awesome is that? That's Santa Claus. That's old St. Nicholas. Under the spiritual teacher, which would be the hermit. There are great rewards in spending time alone. Use those moments of solitude to focus on love. Santa Claus focused on love. And ways in which you might give to those around you. Shine your light as an example for others to follow. Seek out a spiritual mentor of your own if the life feels unfulfilled right now. This is the hermit card. He is going out to spend time alone. He's going to be focusing on wisdom and love and wise things, bringing knowledge into wisdom. And he's shining a light for other people. Does St. Nicholas, does Santa Claus not do that? Yes, I would argue that he does. And it's a beautiful deck. And I want to say I used this for a period of time, again, around that time period. I got some heavy hitting readings. So to say that you can't get a deep or in-depth reading from a deck, this would be in terms of tarot. I have two tarot cards decks that I would say are quite nice washed or very affirmative sense. And both of those I have gotten very intense, very deep, very layered readings from them, because the magic isn't in the cards, it's in myself. And so what this cards triggers for me, the message is there, whether I'm using this or I'm using the Marielle. And I received some really intensely deep, a little bit hard hitting, in fact, messages that I was kind of like, well, hello, there, Guardian Angel Tarot, who is giving it like it is, right, in your sweet kitschy way, but still saying what it is. And also, if you really get in and read these messages, you can see the original cards in them. It really hasn't strayed from them. So yeah, so is there a place in the world for the Guardian Angel Tarot? And again, like Katey, I'm not getting into all of the Doreen Virtue stuff that's happened since. That's her path to walk. It has nothing to do with me. It has nothing to do with the cards that I have, whether it has her name on it or not. These are my cards. This has to, for me, has to do with nostalgia. It has to do with my grandmother. It has to do with healing work. And it, when I pick it up, I always do have that memory of these, like, oh, you called me out, Guardian Angel Tarot, right? So again, is there a place for this? Yes. Some people love kitsch. Some people love angels. Some people love nostalgic, Victorian-esque, lacy things. And this might be just what they want. And even for somebody like me, who's quite I love Marseille style decks. I love pip decks. I love really balanced decks. I love the Guardian Angel Tarot for what it can do in those certain moments in which I need them, or I need to hear it, and I need to hear it from this way. It's almost like grandma calling me out. So the point is that the message is in me. This is a tool, and if the tool works, the tool works. I'm not going to argue with the tool and say, oh, even though you worked, you're too nice. I can't use you. You're too nice. It worked. Another deck I think that people would definitely call a nice washed tarot. And I do have problems. This is, to me, is not a perfect deck. Neither one of these are decks that I use all the time. Again, I do really lean towards very balanced decks and more neutral ground type decks, I suppose. I would be best put it. So these are not decks that I use on a regular basis. So I want to be clear about that. But boy, when they need them, they're there and they work. Now, I do have problems with a deck called the Good Tarot. I've done reviews on both of these decks. You can go find them. I'm not going to go into it. There are things that I have issue with. When things are marketed as being good versus the bad, evil, scary, regular tarot. So I do have issues with some of that. But again, to me, it's a tool. I don't have to buy into any of that, and I can just use them as I wish to use them. No harm, no foul. So this is a good tarot, and I had more of the issues that I have with this is the style of artwork. Isn't generally my preferred style, although there are some absolutely beautiful cards in this deck. And I really purchased this deck purely for, it was $15, and there weren't a lot of images that were out on it, and I found one in my Barnes & Nobles early on, and I thought, okay, for 15 bucks, I'm going to pick that up. So because people were really wondering what were the cards in there, is this something that they should order? And so I picked it up for review purposes, and you know, again, some things I love, some things that I didn't love as much. I have done readings with this deck for certain clients and certain friends that simply need, sometimes you have, I have literally had clients say, I need a hug. I need support. I don't need to see 10 people with 10 swords in the back of a person laying bloody on the ground. I just don't need that. My daughter, she doesn't need it. I can explain to her what the cards mean, and she knows what they mean, and she trusts me. But no matter what, when the Ten of Swords comes up with blood pooled all around and swords in the back, she doesn't get the message, because in her head, no matter what I'm saying, in her head, something horrible is about to happen. And she's simply a person who doesn't need that. Not everybody needs it in specific times. Not everybody needs it anytime. And it is not for you or me or anybody else to say that that person has no right then to read tarot if they can't take it. You know, if you can't take it like a big girl, then, you know, get off the playing field. That to me is so short-sighted, because there is much for tarot to offer, and it doesn't necessarily have to have bold, in your face, dark, bloody images in order to, I think we sell tarot short. I think that's one of my biggest messages out of all of this rambling, is that I think that we sell tarot as the system. We sell tarot short if we think that it can only function in one way. One of the beauties of tarot is that it is a system of 1 through 22, or 0 through 21. It's a system of 4 suits. We put the elements on them, but that is not something that was historically automatically placed on them. We placed things on top of a structure that is beautiful and balanced. And there's my beautiful, not balanced in the moment dog. Isabel. Isabel? No. No. Wait till she's done. Heaven forbid somebody walk in the path. That's literally what it is. Somebody has walked to their car, or somebody has walked to the garbage cans, and she protests. Anyways, I think that the system, the structure of tarot, the bones, right? The bones of tarot are strong and balanced, and we do tarot a disservice to assume that it cannot take on many different clothing over the top of the bones and serve that person or certain people or the moment very well. And so while this is not a deck that I take out and use very often, I don't think I've ever, to just full disclosure, I don't think I've ever done a personal reading for this on myself, but I have used this deck with certain people, and it has been exactly what they needed to hear. They came away feeling fulfilled. There were deep messages that were brought out. There were also supportive messages that were brought out. There were clear messages that were brought out, because the person who is supposed to bring the clear message is me. I am responsible for bringing clear messages to my clients or to whoever I'm reading for. The cards don't have to do that for me. I can take any card that even just has the name of it on there and give a clear message for my clients. But if an image is going to either support or hinder their hearing of the message, I'm always going to go for the deck that is going to support them getting the message. And there are people that I have used this deck with, and they have gotten the message. They have heard what they've needed to hear, whether that be support, and in a couple times some really deep work that was done with this deck for that particular person in that particular moment. And that's all I expect of this tool. I expect this tool to do its job, in which it allows me to do my job to get a message to a person who is in need of a message, whatever that trappings and color on the outside of it may look like. So I keep the good tarot, even though I don't use it very often, because when I do use it, it's there, and it's there for the people and the situation in which it works, and that's fantastic. So those are probably the most, what I would think of, people would think of as nice washed tarots that I own. I think she actually mentioned, somebody had mentioned the Spirit Song Tarot. I personally disagree with this being a nice wash tarot. Again, see, that's part of the problem, right? Part of the problem with trying to label the decks that you use as authentic and powerful, and the deck somebody else might use that you consider to be nice washed, labeling like that is so subjective. And so while on the outside, again, I feel like it's short-sighted to look at a deck and say, oh, it's pastel, right? The color scheme is pastel. It's nice washed. There's animals on it. It's nice washed, I guess. I don't actually I have used this deck a lot, and I actually don't consider this deck to be nice washed. Or I do think it's supportive, but I think all decks are supportive. They just go about the support in a different way. I have gotten amazing readings with this. I've used it for all different kinds, just general tarot readings, some Journey with Grief readings. I've used it with all different kinds of readings and all different kinds of questions. And I actually find the animals that they use to work very well. I feel like this was one of the few, if not only, decks in which I think two systems, an animal oracle deck and the tarot system, were overlapped and actually works really well. I think that Paulina Cassidy did an amazing job at this deck, at the keywords, at the deck, at the animals that are on the deck. I don't consider this to be a nice wash deck. It's pastel, but so what? Now does pink mean that something is, if something is pink and lightly colored and not bold and vivid, that means that it is now just too nice of a deck? Like, is it now we're going down to be what colors decks are determines whether it is whitewashing or hugging or sweet or fluffy or, you know, not valid? That to me is very short-sighted, because I have not found this deck to be in any way anything other than a good solid deck to read with. But I will say this is an excellent deck for, again, somebody who doesn't want to see bloody images, somebody who doesn't, sometimes it gets down to even connotations of motherhood and family and parenthood. Sometimes those are very deep issues with people, and just taking people away can take that step back, and which again allows the message. And so I'm gonna, so there is something, a step back away from. There's certainly not any destructive images in here. There's not any blood or gore or anything like that in here. But to me, it's a very neutral deck that reads beautifully. I really love this deck. So I mean, I guess I'm see if I had any other points I want to make, because I feel like I'm just rambling. But my point is that on the people who might say that, we are destroying, we are ruining tarot by these types of decks, that whoever the ubiquitous they is, everybody has different ideas of what deck that might be that is being disrespectful or does a disservice to tarot or the history of tarot. I say, you're doing a disservice to tarot. Tarot, as a bone structure, is strong and it's old, and it has from the very beginning had many, many things layered and removed and layered and removed and juggled around. If you start reading and getting into the history of tarot and the decks that were there, the minor arcana was moved around, things were taken out, things were put in. The idea of adding elements and Kabbalah and astrology and every kind of esoteric layer that you could put onto it has been put on and removed, and the bones stand strong, right? The bones of tarot stand strong, and there is no one right way. I do believe to call something a tarot deck, it needs to have the bones of tarot. I do believe that, but what you choose to put on those bones are not going to do anything to tarot, to the structure of tarot. So I think that Yeah, I think I'm starting to ramble now. So that's one of my important points there. And now I've got to pause and regroup. Do I think that there are some decks that I don't particularly like? Yes, there are decks that I don't like for a variety of reasons, right? That just aren't for me. They are not decks for me. There are even a few decks, and no, I'm not going to name names or call decks out. There are a few decks that I think actually shouldn't have been published, that I do think don't really function well as a tarot deck, because often of pre-existing art that's been smashed into the system, it doesn't really work. That's a big one for me. Or again, for me personally, all one gender decks don't generally work for me. They just, for me personally, they take away from the balanced feel of a deck. I don't mind switch ups. I love Tarot of the Hidden Realms. It has a female hermit card in there, but I do like some degree of masculine feminine balance in a deck. I do like light and shadow in my deck. So my primary neutral source of decks are going to have light and shadow, are going to have masculine and feminine in balance. And there are some decks that I think that remove that for me personally wouldn't work, or it's not something I would choose to purchase. As well as, again, some that are just pre-existing art. I don't think that the creators sometimes knew anything about tarot and they just kind of thrown something together. I do think that that does a disservice to tarot, because I hate to think that a new person new to tarot would stumble on some of those, and that would be their introduction, which would be, to me, quite confusing of an introduction to tarot. So I'm not saying that every single deck on the market is, 3 thumbs up and go you. There are some problems in publication of decks, but in this instance, we're just talking about this idea of nice washing and whether or not affirmative decks have their place. And so I just recommend, again, that you watch Katey's video, which was far more succinct than my usual rambling. But I hope that I kind of at least made some degree of point that I don't think you need a shadowy, dark deck in order to do shadow work whatsoever. I'm perfectly capable of getting there myself, and sometimes, as Katey said, we just need a light in the dark, and that's the case with myself, and that's sometimes the case with my clients. Number 2, tarot is big enough and strong enough, and the bones are secure enough to come in many various flavors and differences that will work for some and not work for others, and that's okay. We can all coexist peacefully. The third point was the fact that the message for me, it's a tool, it's a piece of paper. The message is in me, and so anything that I can use, any toolkit that I can use that is going to best get my message out to the person that I'm reading for, that's the tool that I'm going to pick up. Is what's going to allow my message that I'm getting for them to them in a way that they can take it and hear from it and learn from it, is what's important, not what particular coding is on the tool that I pick up. So I think that we do readers a disservice, we do querents a disservice, we do tarot, the bones, the structure of tarot, a disservice to think that it cannot exist and it cannot function and function well unless it is, whatever your notion of tarot with a capital T might be. So I hope that you've enjoyed this. I'm going to stop rambling because, as always, it is way longer than I intended it to be, and I probably am not going to edit it because this is just a ramble response to the lovely Katey Flowers, and I'll be interested to see what you think in the description box below if you think that there's any place for nice washed decks. I just love the term. I think that's what Katey said, why she had to make the videos, just because she thought the term was awesome, and that was partially the motivation for myself as well. So have a wonderful day. It's a beautiful sunshine. I just look at it, it's a blue and sunshiny day, and I'm going to go out and enjoy it, and I hope you do as well.